What's going on, Broncos country? AJ back, and we're here with some more Broncos talk. And man, we got some good ones for you today. Of course, we all saw the breaking news this morning. Miami Dolphins have released receiver Tyreek Hill and are completely cleaning house. Also released Bradley Chubb, by the way, which is something we'll also talk about as we get into the video. But what we're really going to discuss is why I think a lot of y'all in Broncos country need to not be so quick to say no to the idea. Of course, we'll get into that. And of course, we also got to get into the notion of Riley Moss being traded to the Philadelphia Eagles for A.J. Brown. Why, if there's anything that we should be saying no to, it's that. And of course, could we be getting a soon to be former division rival suiting up in the orange and blue? Something I've talked about in the past, and I feel like it would actually bear some incredible fruit if it came into fruition, but we'll get into that here in a little bit. What we're going to start with here, however, is some really interesting news that was revealed over the weekend, and that is, of course, the Broncos hiring Doug Belk, former defensive backs coach of the USC Trojans for the last 2 seasons. And I gotta say, this one's really interesting to me. He has 2 years of defensive coordinator experience out at the University of Houston, and of course started out as a graduate assistant under Nick Saban at the University of Alabama. So if nothing else, that latter part is at least something to be considered, but whether or not that winds up being as valuable as we'd like to think it is, not to mention the fact that I'm not really sure what the value is on him being the defensive backs coach for the USC Trojans actually brings. But, I mean, if nothing else, and I would like to think this would help, you got a couple of guys in Kamari Ramsey and Bishop Fitzgerald who are looked at pretty highly coming into the 2026 draft. So there's that. But if nothing else, the big thing for me more than anything else, especially on the heels of not only Pete Carmichael being hired as the Buffalo Bills offensive coordinator, but of course former defensive backs coach Jim Leonhard, who at one point was seen as the heir apparent to Vance Joseph as a potential DC down the road, is now the defensive coordinator for the Buffalo Bills. So obviously that was a void that needed to be filled, and this is the guy that we're filling it with apparently. Now, again, whether any of those things offer a whole lot of value, I'm not going to really go into that. What I will say, however, is one coach that is coming back, as we know, is defensive coordinator Vance Joseph, as mentioned. I think pairing Belk with Vance Joseph, to me, I feel like is definitely win-win more than anything else, especially given the fact that I think there's a pretty good chance, whether it be 2027, 2028, or somewhere beyond, Vance is going to mess around having another great shot at becoming a head coach somewhere again in the NFL. I mean, I'd have a tough time believing that it's out of the question, especially with the job that he's done with that defense, especially since the 70-point disaster against, ironically enough, the aforementioned Miami Dolphins. I mean, you just can't really go wrong either way in this situation. And I think that the youthful energy that Belk will bring to the table here out in Denver, it's just going to speak volumes in so many ways that I don't know we're going to give enough credit for. But with that in mind, we're going to move right along into a couple of different nuggets that were brought up. One in particular was the idea of actually trading Riley Moss to the Philadelphia Eagles for A.J. Brown. Hell the fuck no to that. And the one reason I say that in particular is because of the fact that, truth be told, I don't see trading Riley as a move to begin with. Now, I can certainly understand the issue when it comes to the pass interference calls, but I think we all know by now a good chunk of those, probably even the vast majority of those, were absolute bullshit. I mean, there's just no ifs, ands, or buts about that. And if nothing else, the rest were just picking on poor Riley for a very, very massive chunk of the earlier part of the season. However, as the season progressed, you actually saw less flags thrown in Riley's direction, if any at all. So, the idea of trading him, not that I take anything away from an A.J. Brown, who I want to talk more about as we get towards the end of this video, I don't know why you would do that with anything other than draft picks. And not only that, I feel like Riley Moss still brings an awful lot of value to the secondary, and especially bringing in a guy like Belk, who knows what winds up improving because of that alone. Now, there is the notion of the Broncos do need to hire a cornerbacks coach after Addison Lynch was fired, along with receivers coach Kerry Colbert and now former offensive coordinator Joe Lombardi. But I feel like the moves that are going to be made with the coaching staff are going to make a huge difference in that. And we're going to be seeing Riley in a completely different light in 2026 than what we did in 2025. And if for no other reason, you can't go anywhere but up from here. I mean, I understand the incredible accomplishments and achievements that the Broncos defense made. 68 sacks, 4 away from the all-time record for a regular season. But the reason that wound up being the case has a lot to do with Riley Moss. It's even more so because of PS2, obviously, but Riley Moss had his hand in that because, he was shutting some dudes down too. But speaking of shutting some dudes down, and this one I find kind of wild because a lot of people want to shut down this idea for one reason or another. But could Max Crosby become a Denver Bronco? And yes, I'm talking about Raiders pass rusher Max Crosby. I mean, obviously the Raiders are in full-blown rebuild mode, similar to the Dolphins. And they've done a little bit of cleaning house themselves. Now, whether or not this necessarily happens, obviously remains to be seen. But this is something I've certainly toyed with in a lot of conversations. And hell, I'll even admit I'm guilty of putting him on the Broncos on Madden. So what? But really and truly what this all boils down to is, I think it's pretty obvious at this point, JFM is likely heading elsewhere in 2026. I hate that idea. I don't want that to be the case. But at the end of the day, he's probably going to get a better offer elsewhere. That's just reality. And I wish him nothing but the best in that. I would also wish for him to actually have it to where we found a way to keep him around. But realistically speaking, especially with all of the other in-house free agents, not to mention the other outside of the house moves that the Broncos could be making, I mean, if nothing else, JFM might be a glorified cap casualty at this point. We'll have to see. But saying no to a guy like a Max Crosby is just absolute silliness of the highest order. And part of me is hoping that it happens. I'm a little bit doubtful, but I'm hoping like hell that it does. Now, with all that being said, of course, we also got to talk about, as I said, the breaking news, Miami parting ways with Tyreek Hill. And this is actually quite understandable. Again, the Dolphins are cleaning house. They also released Bradley Chubb. I got to imagine, at least I'd like to think, they'd probably part ways with Aminka Fitzpatrick as well. I mean, we'll see how all that works out, but I don't imagine he'll be sticking around in Miami for very long. Where he goes remains to be seen, but he certainly still has a lot to offer, similar to a Tyreek Hill. He really has a lot to offer. Now, the one issue I'd be concerned about more than anything else is more the knee injury he suffered in the middle of the season in 2025. Well, fairly early in the season. I want to say it was like the 5th or 6th game in or something like that. But either way, not only messing up his kneecap, but doing some damage to at least a couple of different ligaments. Okay, I can understand he's not necessarily going to be that burner that he was in Kansas City or early on during his time in Miami. But if you're actually going to try to look me in the face and tell me you don't see him pulling off 1,200 yards, especially in a Broncos uniform, you've absolutely got to be out your damn mind. And I understand the off the field issues. I can see people not wanting him around for that. That's fine. I have no problem with that. But the issue with that I think a lot of people are missing here is I'm not talking about this on bring him in like on a 3 or 4 year deal worth multi-million dollars or anything like that. Oh, fuck no. Absolutely not. And shout out to Moose from Broncos Breakdown by Chat Sports. He said it just like I've been saying it. 1 year prove it deal. That's all you got to do. And let's be perfectly honest here, especially given the injury right now, I don't see him going other than maybe Kansas City on anything other than a 1 year prove it deal. Because he's going to have to prove he's still at least some semblance of what we've known Tyreek Hill to be. And I believe he's every bit of that and then some, especially the healthier that he gets. Now, of course, with the trajectory as far as his recovery is concerned, it's not expected that he'll be back for the start of the season, much like a Patrick Mahomes. But in that same vein, dude's actually a freak athlete of a human being, and if I believe in anyone coming back from such an injury, maybe not completely to the same capacity, but as close to it as humanly possible, it's Tyreek Hill. I mean, look at Kevin Durant and the shit that he went through with his Achilles injury. What more do I need to say about that? Now, of course, we're talking about two completely different beasts here, as both of them are beasts, but I feel like Hill is beast enough to where, as long as he's recovered well enough, he could still be that, especially to the tune of like 12, maybe 1,400 yards. Now, does this necessarily happen? Probably not. But if you think taking it in consideration and doing the due diligence is out of the question, I'm sorry. You're out of your damn mind and you're speaking and thinking with a little too much hate in your heart. Not to mention the fact that a lot of that happened out in Miami. This is Denver. Completely different kind of scenery from Miami to Denver. But that's neither here nor there. I mean, it is what it is there. Let me know what y'all think down below either way. I'm pretty sure a lot of you are going to be pretty hard no on this. But think about it like this. 1 year prove it deal. You're telling me you're going to say no to that? Again, let me know what y'all think down below. Help me out on the algorithm. Hit that like, share, and subscribe if you enjoy the content. Especially because you want to help your boy out and all that. But, you know, neither here nor there. And if you want to really help, hit that notification bell so you know when more vids are coming through. That being said, this has been your time with A&J, and I thank you for spending it with me.